I got his leg and his left hand. I'll just read two more. Skipping over Hiroshima because I think we've had enough darkness. I'll read two. This is homebrew from the point of view of a woman in Evansville, Indiana. He never drank a lick before the war, but he came back a fall-down drunk. He said they'd cook up homebrew from potatoes or from fruit and then get bombed among the dead. He started slapping me around and changed to someone moaning to himself at night, "Oh God, oh Mom." A silent man, deranged inside, his spirit bottled up. One night last year I woke up with his hands around my throat. His mouth was moving. He was dreaming. I thumbed him in the eyes till he came round. And when he understood, he broke down, weeping. He put his medals in a box. "It's done," he said, and got a drink. It wasn't done. Last poem is called At the Retirement Home. Have you guys ever heard of the Baton Death March? Have you guys ever heard of the Baton Death March? Not so much? When the U.S. Army and the Filipino Army were captured in the Philippines by the Japanese Army, they were marched from 60 miles to prison camps. Because the Japanese Army was trained with the ideals of Bushido and the idea that anybody who surrenders is unworthy of living, that surrender is actually worse than death, and those who surrender are deserving of death. They brutalized those who they captured. They deprived them of food and water, of medical care. They bayoneted them, cut off their heads with samurai swords. If they fell down, they ran them over with tanks and half-tracks. They killed about 25,000 prisoners en route. It's one of the early well-publicized horrors of war. And the speaker is from the 194th Armored Regiment. He's a survivor of the Baton Death March. And later on, he's retired speaking. I'll probably go into character to read this poem. It's called At the Retirement Home. This is the last poem I'll read. I've had both knees replaced. I got a steel pin in my hip. I don't hear you so good, but I'm not stupid, son. How would you feel surviving the Baton Death March? No food for days, no water, and the ones who fell behind were bayoneted where they lay. And now, you're marching off to death. Real hell is not old age, though. No. Taking away the rights we died for, saying torture's right, that's hell. Hand me the iron in those shirts, would you? Thanks, son. As long as I have fight, I'll love this country till it hurts. And it does. This is worse than what I saw overseas. Torture in America. Thank you. And I know you have to run, but if you people want, we could have a Q&A, or what do you normally do?
Have a Q&A.
A little Q&A? All right. Yeah, go ahead.
I just am unclear. Did you actually, all the poems that you wrote in Time of War, did you have interviews with?
Not with all those people.
Okay.
A lot of them were based on oral histories,
Okay.
diaries, letters, trial transcripts. So, for example, the cannibalism poem was based on an Australian trial transcript of a Japanese soldier who was prosecuted for eating other soldiers. Yeah.
All right.
Very few of them were actually invented. in fact, the only one that was invented out of the top of my head was the last one I read.
Wow.
Because I tried to imagine what it must be like for these patriotic men who had survived such horrible things to be living in a country where the ideals they died for are starting to become undermined, under our previous administration. So, give away my political beliefs, but there we are. Yeah. But I did interview some vets and some of their families, and a lot of these actually were based on, they're actually composite characters because they didn't want to tell, it felt a little exploitative to tell any particular person's story. But if I could find the through line and by reading maybe 40 oral histories about, let's say, Pearl Harbor or the sinking of the USS Indianapolis, and then find the essentials of the narrative and tell the story with a sense of journalistic integrity, that's to say inventing nothing, using as much of the vernacular, the language, and the narrative details as possible, then I felt I was being accurate, while at the same time not appropriating anybody's story in a way that might be unethical. It's a difficult thing to do, especially when I'm speaking from different genders, different ethnicities, and different nationalities, and I'm trying to do so in a way that feels non-exploitative, if possible. Yes?
Can you say something more about doing research as really the basis for your poetry?
Sure.
Because you do that in almost everything. There's instead of writing from whatever voice you might possess, you're doing all kinds of reading and translating and so forth. And I'm really interested in that.
Well, I'll say that, I write however I can write. So if a poem comes to me, I can write it down. That's great. But I always have a number of research projects going, Pulp Fiction, or the Tarot Sonnets, or the Tongue of War, or whatever it is. And I believe that these come out of my translation practice. Because when you translate, you already have the text written. And the question is, how do you make this text, this story, this poem, this lyrical engine that happens in Chinese or Spanish or another language, function in English in a way that creates the same possibility for revelation for your readers as it does in the other language. So your practice is always to, you have an already written text, and the question is, how do you make it go off in the mind in a way that's lyrically and narratively effective and creates this sense of epiphany and resolution. So when I'm working from the log of Christopher Columbus, or from an oral history about World War II, or from the various interpretations of tarot cards, I'm looking for the story, the engine, the thing that might go off, the little phrase. It might be something very simple. For example, reading about a Frisian boy, which is to say German-derived boy who lived in North Dakota, who saw his neighbors, Japanese-American neighbors, taken away to the internment camps, and then would run past their houses, their empty houses, in fear of the sense of their haunted emptiness. And while he was doing that, and this is what the interesting point is, in the interview he said, I would run past those empty houses singing Pistol Packin' Mama, which is an old song that Frank Sinatra and others sang. Run past them lickety-kites, singing Pistol Packing Mama. Lickety-kite, not lickety-split, but lickety-kite. So when I heard lickety-kite instead of lickety-split, first off, I loved that little phrase. And then Pistol Packing Mama, that was a detail that you couldn't invent. And so that gave me the entire poem. That gave me the voice, it gave me the sense of being haunted. And the very fact that he was a boy who was haunted by the disappearance of his Japanese-American neighbors, who himself was of German origin. He must have at some level thought, are they going to put us in camps too? Because we're at war with Germany too. And so it gave a sort of psychological depth to the poem as well. So a little thing like that can give you the whole poem. And it's a question of reading until you find it, recognizing it. And it's the same thing with translation. I'm sure you have this experience, I have it many times, of reading translations and feeling like they're not poems in English. Because whatever's happening, they might have been accurate to some surface level, but they're not accurate to the poetry that makes the poem move you. And so, as a translator, I've learned to search for that, and I find that in my research as well. I hope. I look for it in my research anyways.